Hey, friends. So I had a conversation when I was in New York a few weeks ago, with a good friend of mine who is in the art world. She works in the art world, she and her husband, and they've recently kind of been um, been hired to put together a private collection for someone who has the means to do this and has an abiding interest in art. And we were just talking about the world of that. It's a world that I'm not super familiar with, but I enjoy these conversations about it. And there is, there are elements of the fine art world that are they're somewhat unique to that world in a way. Like, for example, it's not uncommon for them to spend vast sums of money on a single artwork, because again, this person has the means, and the collection represents an investment in art, and it represents an attempt to create a collection, to create a collection that has an identity, that has integrity, that has longevity, and it's part of that world. Now, one of the things we talked about was those prices seem loony sometimes when especially in the context of an art world in which there's a lot of junk. There's a lot of stuff going around that doesn't really have that much integrity or that much longevity. And again, I'm not an expert here. I would be horribly unqualified to determine the difference between, something that really is legit and something that's kind of junk. But as with virtually any domain, that's what the landscape looks like. So we were talking about this. We were talking about, like, well, what actually would justify the level of financial investment that these pieces sometimes involve. And what came out of our conversation was, well, the only thing really that justifies this to me is that art opens the door to something greater. Art opens a portal into a larger world, into a beyond, into something inestimable, priceless, and of genuinely profound value. And setting aside for a moment the fact that may not always be what's happening in an artwork, if we assume that there are instances in which this is taking place, and that's somehow at the root of the stability of the art market, that's the best that I can come up with as far as articulating what is going on there. Why certain pieces by certain artists would be valued at such an astronomical financial prices, and would retain that value over time. Is that those pieces open a portal, they open a space, they create a channel for something to enter the world that was not there before. And that then kind of got me thinking, that's what's happening with all art. That's what's happening with music. That's what's happening with theater. it's almost like that reflecting upon art in that context gave me a really interesting definition of what art is and what art does, the actual kind of function and purpose. And I started to think about the fact that, we as artists, we can open that door, we can open that portal, and we can create a channel to something beyond us. But we can't determine what comes through that portal. That's the thing. That's a key element of understanding the creative process, is understanding that we are responsible for opening the door. We cannot determine what comes through the door. And to that extent, it's also possible to not really know how to interpret our own work, because we can open the door, and what comes through the door, we might recognize it one way, but someone else recognizes it a completely different way. Now, maybe those interpretations are both valid. Maybe it's perfectly valid for the artist to have one interpretation of their work and the audience to have a different interpretation of their work. My own experience is that is of course possible, and we're not looking for like the right answer here, but it's also the case that that in general my experience tells me something's coming through, and it's intentional. It's not absent of intention. And our job as artists is not to get better at knowing it's not to get better at saying what we want to say. It's to get better at understanding what we are saying. It's to get better at discerning what's coming through that portal. That's to me, when I'm around people who are vibrating at that frequency, artists who really have profound depth in their work, what I see is people who are attuned. It's like tuning a radio station so that it's like getting the fine tuning right so that you hear the station clearly and you can actually understand it, as opposed to being kind of slightly out of tune. It's coming in, I'm getting a lot of sound, I'm getting a lot of noise, but it's vague, there's static, there's interference. That last bit of fine discriminatory tuning, but I'm not, that doesn't mean that I'm singing the song or that I'm broadcasting the song. It means I'm receiving the song. And that's in a lot of ways how I see artwork. My own work is littered with lines, moments, lyrics where days, weeks, months after the fact, I finally understand, oh, that's what that means. And it's so exciting to discover what our own work means. And we can have there's an enthusiasm about it that's almost like a kid. We remain forever a kid in a candy store, because it could be it's not ours. We're always receiving it anew. How much more empowered is that than I'm giving something from myself and I'm going to run out of it, or a sense of like, this has to come from me or it won't exist. No, my energy doesn't determine how much of this is available. I just have to be available to the literal cosmos of incoming streams of inspiration and information and intelligence and creativity. I can have as much of it as I can possibly, as there are hours in the day, if I'm willing to tune in, if I'm willing to do the practice of that discriminatory tuning. One of the things we also talked about in the conversation was, we're talking about political art and why political art. She was expressing a sense that political art was not was of a different category. And I'm somebody who I've made a lot of political art in my day, so this is not something that I'm poo-pooing from a kind of snobby position. But the thing about political art is political art has already decided what it's going to say. The message is decided on before you even make the art. So opening a door and listening to what's coming through, not knowing, being willing to hear whatever is coming through, kind of not so much on the agenda if you're making political art. And but the thing is, again, taking it back to the conversation about the astronomical prices in the fine art world, if you've already decided on your message and the artwork ultimately just contains that message, well, then your artwork should be have a very calculable value. It should be the materials plus the cost of labor, and it should be like any other product that we make that has, there's material cost, there's labor cost, and there's distribution cost. Well, it could be like a phone or a computer or a toy or a football, but that's not the same thing. Those things don't open a portal into the unknown. So again, it was just it was interesting to reflect on this and to extract, to really, more than anything, it provoked me to ask the question, well, what would justify that? And again, God knows stuff's out there going for millions of dollars that may or may not ever be worth anything. Whether that's a wise way to spend money or how we should be distributing our resources, none of those questions are the topic of what I'm delving into here. What I'm interested in pursuing is, well, what does art do? What is the function of art? What is of actual profound art, which I've been so lucky to be around a number of people who really do live that way, really do create that way, and clarifying for myself what's really going on and how it really is a process of receiving, and just like any other process of receiving, gratitude plays a massive role. If we know that everything that we're producing as artists is actually being received, doesn't that change the level of our gratitude around it and the level of just appreciation for what's really going on here? What this instrument is and what it's not, and what this art is, what this music is and what it's not. It really puts things in a frame that I find helpful and incredibly inspiring. It really just it affirms and enthuses me in being on this path and putting my focus on this area in my life. So yeah, that's what I got today, folks. Thanks for watching. So much love. I appreciate you. Have a wonderful day. I'll see you tomorrow.